Welcome to Crime in Court. This is the 1996 Menendez brothers trial. We're reading through the transcript. We are continuing on with the state's case, part 33. We're almost done with their case. We are just finishing up with the forensic pathologist. I just want to remind you that this is the forensic pathologist, Dr. Robert Lawrence, who the prosecution brought on for the second trial. He did not testify in the first trial. He is basically analyzing the ME who actually did the autopsies. He's investigating the ME's reports and basically reporting back on it. That's what he did. So he didn't do the autopsies himself, and he's trying to defend whatever position the state has him defending when he really doesn't have the information or know what he's talking about. So at least that's my impression so far. What do you guys think about it so far? He's had some interesting back and forth between Leslie Abramson, which we are actually, I think we're in the middle of redirect. I can't remember. We'll find out. No, cross examination, recross. We're on recross. Sorry. It's been a long one. This guy's been on the stand for a while. So let us get started without further ado. Please hit that like button. And we just came back from break. So this was our lunch break on November 8th, Wednesday, November 8th, 1995. We are continuing on. The court says anything without the jury. Okay, let's get the jury out. The jury enters the courtroom and the following proceedings are held. The court says, okay, the jury is back. The witness is on the stand. You may continue your recross examination. Ms. Abramson says, thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Lawrence, I rewrote on this piece of paper, which I would like to mark next in order, Your Honor. The court says 243. Ms. Abramson says, thank you, Your Honor. I rewrote on 243 the list that we had that we were doing earlier about the number of pellets observable on an x-ray. And is it true, Dr. Lawrence, that if you're looking at an x-ray and you don't have a full set, both front and back and left and right, that pellets can be behind each other and you can't tell that there's more than one, or do you think that's not true of any of these x-rays? Good question. He says, I did not. Well, I can't tell. If a pellet is located in the right position with respect to another, there can be one view that would make them look as if they were one. But you had two views. But with more than one view and different levels showing the same pellets, that's highly unlikely. Under the circumstances, impossible, actually. It's impossible? With multiple views, yes. We're going to deal with what we've seen on these x-rays with the assumption that there's no others hiding behind anything, okay? That's a reasonable assumption. Thank you. What I've done on 243 is you've repeated that with respect to Mr. Menendez, what we see on the x-ray and the left elbow is 5, correct? I don't remember now. It's been a few hours. So here's what we did. X and then questionable? Fine. I'm not changing anything here you want to see. I'm going along with what you're comfortable with. He says all the numbers on the left-hand column on the X column are the same. We have Mr. Right Arm 9 and Mrs. Left Arm. You were comfortable with 1, and Mrs. Left Chest, you were comfortable with 12, correct? These were the two. The far right column is questionable in your mind, correct? Yes. All right, now you're aware that in the autopsy report, Dr. Golden talks about, with respect to Mr. Menendez, a wound pattern that he calls number 6, correct? Yes. And what he's talking about with respect to number 6 is a separate wound that he locates on Mr. Menendez's sternum that he indicates as part of the whole picture involving what you call abrasions on the chest wall. And he connects it to wound number 3, which is this big gaping wound on the upper arm, correct? Yes. All right. And does the autopsy report indicate that? Well, first of all, have you seen an x-ray of Mr. Menendez's chest? Yes. The area we're talking about was covered in some of the x-rays we've looked at. That we've looked at here? Yes. Gee, I don't have an x-ray of Mr. Menendez's chest. Do you have an x-ray of Mr. Menendez's chest? I don't believe so, Dr. Lawrence. The chest we were looking at was Mrs. Menendez's chest. I don't believe there is an x-ray of Mr. Menendez's chest. He says, "Oh, that is possible." So he doesn't even know whose x-rays he's looking at. All right. So, however, the autopsy report indicates, well, let's look at the x-rays and see what we have. Miss Abramson says, "Certainly. These are the ones I have. Do you have some others? Are you holding the rest?" Okay, now, first of all, to be organized, let's start with the ones that I had up on the board earlier today. Dr. Lawrence says, they show Mary's torso area and Joseph's arm, both arms. They don't show the chest of Joseph. And these are all the rest. The district attorney had them in his file or pile. There are none here of Joseph that show the area of concern. Right. So, calling your attention back to Dr. Golden's autopsy report, does that report indicate that he removed, first of all, that there was a pellet lodged in the sternum and that he removed it? Yes. Okay, Your Honor, there's an envelope that has the exhibit, the number for this trial, 81, and inside there's a smaller envelope. I do not believe the interior envelopes have been sub-numbered. The court says no, they're just 17 envelopes. Ms. Abramson says, what I'd like to do, the court says, I'm sorry, that's contents. It was previously Exhibit 17. Ms. Abramson says, it used to be 17. There are a bunch of envelopes in there. I don't recall offhand how many. None of them have been subnumbered, so I'd like to subnumber them if I could. This interior envelope as 81A. The court says, okay. Mrs. Abramson says, and showing you what's been marked 81A, that is a number 4 buckshot pellet, isn't it? Yes, it is. It's considerably deformed. Yes, as if it had struck a bone. Yes. Now let's look at the envelope. It states that it was removed from the sternum of Mr. Menendez. Yes. So in Dr. Golden, this is all part of this bruising in Dr. Golden's opinion that it's affiliated with the upper arm wound, correct? That's what his opinion is, yes. All right, and if his opinion is right, that adds another known opinion. That's not my opinion. You may not agree with it, but you didn't even realize there was such a wound, did you? Mr. Khan says all object is irrelevant, no relevance in counsel adding it to this exhibit. The court says it's compound. Ms. Abrams says you didn't even talk about this wound when you were directly examined by Mr. Khan, did you? No. Objection, irrelevant, overruled. Did you even recall, until I asked you to reread the report right after lunch, that there was an individual pellet defect in this sternum? It's not a matter of recollection. If we add these up, the court says, wait, wait, wait. The witness says the chart was one that we created with my tally of the pellets that were recovered from the various sites or that are visible on the x-rays. And I don't accept that one as being included in this tally. Miss Abramson says, well, where'd it come from? It looks like it was a straight pellet. I'm not sure where it came from. Could be a ricochet. It didn't penetrate. He plucked it out without even dissecting, so I don't know how it figures in. There's only one set of holes in the shirt. You've already testified to that, right? I'm not even sure this pellet has anything to do with the hole in the shirt. There's no other hole in this shirt. I haven't examined the shirt well enough to see all the holes. Sir. Shouldn't you have done that? Sure. Why don't you do that? I'll do it. It's getting out of my area when we're talking about subtle things like such as tiny holes or whether there are pinholes from putting it up on the board or so forth. So you don't feel comfortable to examine the shirt. No, ma'am. I'd rather have the criminalist give his opinion or her opinion. Um, okay. I I will say that in watching the Karen Reed trial just recently, watching Dr. Laposada give excellent testimony about her forensic analysis of everything. She looked at not only the body and the injuries to the body, but she did look at or took into account things like, deformities and abnormalities that happen to the clothing and things like that. So she did take into account these things. She's a forensic pathologist, and that is part of the I mean, she's not an expert, obviously, in like how wounds or how bullet holes go through shirts, but if you're a forensic pathologist, you see enough of these that you begin to see the patterns. You are a pattern you recognize patterns. That is your whole in medicine and science. You're recognizing the patterns that take place. So for her to or for this guy to be like, "Well, I'm not really able to talk about that." Well, you should know the difference between pellet holes in a shirt and pinholes from pinning it up on the corkboard. Just saying. Anyways, so Ms. Abramson says, let's do this as a hypothetical then, Dr. Lawrence, okay? Let's say hypothetically that pellet in the sternum is affiliated with the upper arm wound and those abrasions, as you call them, abrasions, on the chest, okay? Hypothetically. Yes. Then, if all these wounds are corrected, as that illustration tries to show, you're talking about 28 pellets, correct? Yes. Thank you. The court says, why don't you change that diagram since it doesn't reflect what he testified? Ms. Abramson says, well, I'll put it in parentheses, Your Honor. The court says, put that 28 in parentheses as well. Ms. Abramson says, all right, happy to do that. I will get back to these illustrations. We were talking about 240 and 241, correct? Yes. Now, Dr. Lawrence, you're not offering any opinion, I take it, on the exact sequence of shots here. I'm not. And you wouldn't. I have opinions about some of the sequences, but not all of them. Anything that's postmortem, obviously, comes at the end of something, correct? Unless there's more than one postmortem, then it comes somewhere at the end or near the end. Really, now you're just being difficult. All right, and you're not offering any opinion on, I think you've said this many times now, with absolute precision about any of these wounds, correct? That's not quite correct, no. Well, with respect to angles and directions and exact entry locations, no precision on those matters. Thank you. As far as which wound came after another, I feel quite confident and precise in those interpretations. Okay, let's talk about these diagrams, however. Number 240 and 241 show, I mean, by their very nature, these illustrations only show one hypothesis, one direction, if you will, for the wounds in 240 and 241, correct? Yes, this is a static diagram. It can't show any more than one unless there are several lines drawn in the same picture. And can you hypothesize any different position, let's say, for the gun barrel than what's shown in 240 and 241? Yes, depending on the position of the head. Exactly. And your doll 204 demonstrates, does it not, that if the head turns, say that way, to the right, we won't go beyond what a human can do, then the position of the muzzle of the gun would also swing around, correct? Yes, that's the purpose of the doll as compared to the diagrams. It allows us to move it around and see what's possible and what's not possible. I have a feeling they're very unscientific, especially since he got them at an art store. So how can you compare how a doll moves to the human body? But whatever. Okay. So by the same token, it could go the other way. The head would also be looking to its left, correct? Yes. So there's a whole range here. I don't know how far ahead goes, right? I don't think it goes a whole 180 degrees, but there's a lot of degrees through which a head can travel from right to left, correct? Yes, and a lot of minutes within those degrees. Yes, minutes. As smaller, yes. Is he meaning minutes? I don't know. Smaller units of measurement. And depending on exactly which direction that head is turned, only if you move precisely where the head was turned could you know where the muzzle of the gun was. Correct. And until you know exactly where the muzzle of the gun was, you're only speculating as to where the shooter would be. Objection irrelevant as to witness, overruled. Correct? Yes. So he admits it's only speculation as to where Lyle may have been standing, or where the shooters may have been standing at all. So, when you said earlier that you can't find any medical reason to disagree with this hypothesis, you're not saying this is the true way in which this occurred? I'm not saying that. And you can't give any medical reason to agree with this particular trajectory line as drawn on the diagram, correct? That's incorrect. There are plenty of medical reasons to agree with. But you can't say that's the way it had to happen because we know the head could rotate. I can't say that that is the way it happened. Thank you. Do you understand? Now you understand that this is the second shot in somebody's sequencing arrangement. Do you understand that? Yes. All right. So that from the point on the point on in that hypothesis, Mr. Menendez has received a fatal wound. Yes. And this is the head wound that I believe you thought was just about immediately fatal? Yes. Now we're going to go back to 222 and 223, and you have redrawn a trajectory line on 223 to more accurately reflect the trajectory line that you placed on the mannequin on the doll, correct? Yes. And is there any medical evidence to support the way in which the mannequin in this illustration depicts Mrs. Menendez's body? Is there any medical evidence that says at this point she is standing with her shoulders facing perpendicular to the couch? There is no such evidence to point the exact positioning of the mannequins in any of the illustrations. Thank you. And there's also no medical evidence that would counter that. In other words, it's consistent with that. It doesn't prove those exact positions. All right. And my question is though, we do have on Mrs. Menendez that one pellet that's lodged right above the nose, if you will, on the forehead, correct? I have to see the x-ray again. You have all of them in front of you now. I think you'll find it in this pile. The skull ones are in this pile. There you go. Those are the two. The witness says there was a buckshot pellet lodged beneath the skin, probably right near the midline of the forehead. Right. And if the face were turned, representing its side to the muzzle of the gun, do you believe there would have been a buckshot pellet lodged just beneath the skin? From the x-ray, you can't determine if the pellet went straight in tangential to the forehead or perpendicular to the forehead, or if it came in at an angle. So I can't answer that question in terms of this x-ray. Just to remind you though, that is a wound, that facial wound, that this particular pellet on the forehead is part of that Dr. Golden describes as back to front, front to back rather, with no angulation, correct? he's never specifically talked about this pellet, but my assumption is that he feels that this pellet is part of the shot group that hit her right orbit. And as you can tell by the contours here, coming from the direction that I was supposing, which is slightly off to her right, the pellet could hit there and end up underneath the skin where it is in the x-ray. Yes, but you have just demonstrated again your angle, which is just slightly off to the right, not perpendicular to the right side of her face, correct? Correct. And what was on the chart before you adjusted it was something closer to perpendicular, was it not? You would say it was nowhere near perpendicular. All right. Do you note, by the way, Dr. Lawrence, in this chart of what is labeled shot number 4, the position of Mr. Menendez's legs? Let me correct one thing. Yes, I think you used the word perpendicular when you meant tangential. You went off to the side. I'm using layman's terms. Perpendicular would be straight on, and I don't know, or I don't think that it showed it coming from the side. Okay, lateral. I guess we decided was the side from the lateral. Okay. So you don't think that's what this shows? No. All right. That's sort of what 222 suggests, but you can't see the exact angle in 222 from the right front, but not from the right side, he says. So you think 222 shows from the right front? Yes, the green line is if you could have it in three-dimensional space, you would see that it's probably coming out towards us a little bit in the way the picture is shown. Again, you can ask the person who created it and get a more precise understanding. But he didn't ask you before he created it, correct? I was. Objection, asked and answered. Court says, you can answer the question. The witness says, I had no contact or conversation with anybody before those diagrams were created. Remember, we're going to hear up next on the stand after Dr. Lawrence concludes is the person who made all these diagrams from that failure analysis company. Ms. Abramson says, I was trying to call your attention to the position of Mr. Menendez's legs in this, what you call shot number 4. Okay? Do you note them? In that view and the one next to it. So both of these views. They are parallel to one another, parallel and quite close together. Why don't we do this? You can see it on the picture. It's pretty far. So they're parallel and quite close together, correct? Yes. And by shot 4, it's your understanding that Mr. Menendez is assumedly dead? Yes. Now we're going to move on to 224 and 225, which are labeled shot 5. And this is the shot that went through the forearm and upper arm of Mrs. Menendez. Yes. And this is the one that you demonstrated with the hand on the clavicle. Yes. And you believe that what was happening, your opinion, was that there was this shot to the upper arm and forearm, and then the next shot, which was the hand and the clavicle, or in reverse order. But it's not my opinion that the hand was on the clavicle when the forearm wound was received. It could have been, but it did not have to be. In other words, there could have been a wound first, and then subsequently the hand was on the clavicle when the clavicle wound was received. Huh? But the way you originally demonstrated it here, you indicated it could have been in the same position for both shots. Yes, that's the way I originally demonstrated it. Are you changing it, or do you think it could have? You successfully pointed out that it didn't fit that way. At that point, I realized that it was probably not that way. So I changed your mind? Yes. Oh, that's not good for the state. That's not good for the state when the defense attorney changes your expert's mind. But that's great for the defense. She goes on and says, okay, now with respect to these diagrams through 224 and 225, this is called shot 5. You note Mr. Menendez's legs are in the same position you just demonstrated. Yes. Now, with respect to Mr. Menendez, though, she's lying on her back in this diagram, correct? Yes. Is there any medical evidence that you're aware of that indicates she had to be or she had to have been lying on her back at that point? No. So you remember when I put the X on it, or on 224, that it was for that reason, that there was no medical evidence to show that she was lying on her back. Yes. So although you told Mr. Khan that you don't disagree with that, you can't say that this is a position that her body was ever in, can you? As I said earlier to the jury, we know her body or her position when the body was found. We know she was seated on the couch. We don't know any of the things in between. You don't even know that she was seated on a couch. And, in fact, the position that she's shown in 224 and 225 is not the position in which her body was found. It is not. Now I'm showing you what's been marked as 238 and 239. And even though it isn't noted on these, do you understand that this is the sixth in someone's sequence, supposed to be the sixth, okay? I'll accept that without checking unless you want me to be absolutely sure. She says, there's a six on it, I think, Mr. Khan put, so I think we're safe. Now, in this sequence, what's shown in the shot to her right? And collarbone area. Yes. The right hand, the collarbone, the mandible, correct? Yes. Now, you've already testified that based on the medical evidence, there is nothing inconsistent with those injuries having been inflicted when she was standing up, correct? Yes. And in fact, that's true for what we just saw on number 4, the medical evidence. There's nothing inconsistent with the arm wound occurring while she was standing up. Correct. Now, the arm wound to the forearm and the upper arm, Dr. Lawrence, it broke the bones in both places, correct? Yes. How would it provide any impediment to a person moving that arm that they've got bones broken in two places? Moving it in what way? Up, down, out, all out, at all? It would provide an impediment in terms of precision of movement, ability to grasp something, throw a ball, or so forth. It would not prevent movement of the arm. As a matter of fact, could be. It could actually encourage movement of the arm. What? Let me ask you this. Do you know what kind of nerve damage was suffered in the upper arm, lower arm combination? No. If nerves are damaged, can arms move? Yes. Is there a certain amount of nerve damage that would prevent an arm from moving? Actually, the nerves that would operate the upper arm aren't in that area. So the upper arm as well as the lower arm? Yes, still the nerves are more closer to the spine. So you have no nerves in your arms. Got it. So if you take a knife and stab yourself in the arm, you're only feeling it in your spine, not your arm. I don't believe that. Um, all right. So when you told Mr. Khan that you don't disagree with this drawing, you also can't say that you agree with this depiction. Isn't that correct? I agree with the depiction. I can't prove medically that that is the only possibility. You don't have an opinion as to whether that's the only possibility. You asked if I agree with it, and I do agree with it. I want to distinguish between his asking you, do you disagree, and my saying, do you have a medical opinion that dictates this diagram looking this way? I agree with the diagram, and I have no opinion that dictates that precise diagram. Okay. And we note again, Mr. Menendez's legs are in the same position in this sixth sequence, correct? Yes. Now this is 236 and 237. And is it your understanding that this is supposed to be sequence number 7? Does it say 7? It does. Thank you. And this is supposed to depict the leg wound to Mr. Menendez, correct? Yes. Now, hypothetically, Dr. Lawrence, well, strike that. Is there any medical evidence whatsoever that indicates that Mr. Menendez would be in the position that she is shown in the diagram, Mrs. Menendez? No. And with respect to Mr. Menendez, you see the bailiff says, questioned by the jury, alternate juror says, I can't see. Miss Abramson says, I'm sorry, both pointers are here. Let's do this. Why don't you keep one and I'll keep one? Now, this is supposed to demonstrate a shot being fired from somewhere here over the back of the couch and then through Mr. Menendez's left thigh. Is that correct? Yes. Now, from the medical evidence, you've determined, as you show on the doll, an entry and an exit wound on Mr. Menendez's left thigh, correct? Yes. And you're entirely in agreement with Dr. Golden's findings on what's the entry and what's the exit. Yes. And the way you've put this in, it appears that the exit wound on the outside of the leg is really only a tiny bit lower of the leg than the entry wound. Well, we'll need the photographs if they're going to address those issues, as I've done, or as we've done before. Ms. Aronson says, okay, did you have the appearance of the wound in mind when you made the doll? When I made the doll, I took the autopsy reports and I used the x-rays and the photographs and looked at all of those and then decided how I was going to drill the holes. And then I drilled the holes looking at the doll, not at the photographs. Sometimes I was successful. Other times I was a little off. So some of these will have extra holes where I had to redo it. When I got close enough, I stopped and glued it. It glued the wire in. This doll is not precise, so if you want to know about the relative position of the wounds, we need to look at the photographs. Here's the photograph. That looks pretty close to what I put on the doll. It does, doesn't it? The problem we're dealing with is that leg is markedly distorted due to the fractures and there's some bunching up on the skin at the bottom, so I'm not completely comfortable with these relationships or that these relationships are what they are when he was shot. So there are numerous scene photographs that show him sitting on the couch with that leg visible in the photograph, aren't there? Yes. And can you recall, without having to go through 180 of them, can you recall any scene photograph that in your mind contradicts the impression given by this photograph that the exit wound is only slightly lower than the entry wound? I would say that's probably correct. They are probably quite close, the exit wound being a little further down. Okay, and if you go back to the diagram, however, 236, that would seem to indicate an angle of entry that would place the entry wound much higher on the leg than the exit wound, or at least higher than the picture and the translation of the picture into your doll would suggest. I think you should ask the person that made the diagram. I don't know what the person intended. To me, it shows the trajectory of what was struck and where it went. Are you saying this is an accurate trajectory based on what you see in the photograph, the x-ray, and what you recreated on your mannequin? As accurate as my mannequin, and neither of which can be precise for the many reasons we've discussed. So you don't believe this is precise? Is that a fair statement? That's fair. And I believe you said that you're not a criminalist, so you don't really pay attention to the scene photographs to see if there was any evidence of a shot coming in that direction of the rug. Is that right? I didn't say that. Well, did you look on the rug area to see if there was any evidence of a round of buckshot coming through at the angle depicted at that diagram, in the diagram on the rug? I don't feel comfortable discussing scene findings with respect to carpets and gunshot injuries and so forth because it's out of my area of expertise. That's a fair answer. So, whatever you saw, you don't feel comfortable discussing it. Is that what you're saying? Yes. Would you note Mr. Menendez's legs in this photograph, in this diagram particularly? Let me show it to you. Do you notice how now that there's been a change in position? Yes. The left leg has moved laterally, in other words, towards his leg. Can you show that? They don't need to see that. Dr. Lawrence, are you refusing to do what I'm asking you to do? The court says he doesn't have to do your demonstrations if he doesn't want to. Ask your next question. Holy cow. The court absolutely should have had her back and said, show it to the jury. Holy cow. That was wild. Okay. I don't know what to say about that. Ms. Abramson says, okay, this shows the left leg has moved out slightly. Yes. And the right leg has remained in the position it was in all along? Roughly, yes, ma'am. Now let's go to the next ones, and those were numbers 227, 226, and 227. And this is supposed to be the eighth sequence, correct? Is there an 8 on it? Yes, thank you. In fact, it's printed right here, shot 8B, shot 8A. See that? I need you to read it to me. That's what it says. Thank you. And that's supposed to demonstrate the thigh wound that Dr. Golden says or calls hip thigh to Mrs. Menendez's left leg, correct? Yes. Now, yesterday, when we were talking about this wound, I asked you if, on reflecting and viewing that wound, whether it were not likely that the lower leg wound is, in fact, the entry and the upper individual defects are, in fact, the exits. Do you recall that? Yes. Now, your original opinion here had been, as appears in Dr. Golden's report, that the upper wound was the entry and the lower wound was the exit, correct? Yes, ma'am. I prefer to accept his opinion. Well, I've indicated to you that his opinion may have changed, correct? I've not seen that. But I indicated to you that as a hypothetical. You said that, yes. And did I also ask you whether it didn't make more sense that if the top wounds were an entry wound, it's not logical to assume that they would all get together somehow inside the leg and come out together in this smaller defect, correct? That sounds close to your characterization of this situation. That's an interesting answer. And didn't you agree with that characterization that it made more logical sense to believe that the lower one was the entry and the upper was the exit? I agree with portions of what you say, and I reserve any change in my opinion to the time when I can have medical evidence to show why it should be changed. So far, Dr. Golden has not issued a report that would explain that to me. Let's put Dr. Golden aside. Just from the sense of medical logic, does it make sense that the smaller wound is the entry and the larger distributed pellets would be the exit? Yes. So would it be fair to say that you're uncertain at this point which is which? I have some uncertainty. Okay, and let's assume this diagram doesn't have uncertainty. It's it only shows one point of view, correct? Correct. This diagram only shows the entry being on top and the exit being below, which I believe is the case. But since you have some uncertainty, if that's not the case, this diagram is wrong. Objection, argumentative, sustained. Considering your uncertainty, if in fact the entry wound is the lower one and the exit wound is the top, would you agree the diagram is wrong? Yes. Mr. Khan says, again, argumentative, motion to strike. Overruled. By the way, do you notice in the diagram that Mr. Menendez's left leg seems to have changed position since the previous sequence? Yes, I didn't pay any attention to that. I know that. That's not possible, is it, for a dead man to move his leg that way? If she indeed was shot after him, he would not have moved his leg. Okay, so he was supposed to be shot since shot 2, and this is now 8, correct? Yes. And the only other thing that's supposed to have happened to him is shot 7 in the leg, which moved the leg to the side. Correct. Now the leg is bent at the knee, which is different. Yes. Dead people can't do that, can they? No. And what you've uncovered is an inconsequential artifact. Ms. Abrams says, Your Honor, I'd move to strike that as non-responsive. Sustained. That remark is stricken. Ms. Abramson says, now we're looking at 234 and 235, and this is the one that shows the graze wound to her calf, correct? Yes. And again, Dr. Lawrence, is there any medical evidence that at the time she got the graze wound to her calf, she was in precisely this position on the floor? No. We know she was on the floor. We know the knee was elevated above the floor. But you don't know. We don't know the posturing of her fingers, which way she was looking, or even the posture of her leg precisely. We know fairly precisely the posture of her leg. Well, let me ask you this. I'm sorry, with the graze wound? With the graze wound, it's not as positive. So with a graze wound, you can't say that this was definitely the posture of her leg. Not the exact posture. No, ma'am. In fact, if you recall the way she was actually found on the floor, lying on her right side with the left leg raised above, could it have been could it have even been in that position when the graze wound occurred, the final position? As I recall, when she was found, she was in a position on her right side with her left leg bent in a quite a sharp angle at the knee, such that the calf was within a foot or so of the thigh. And I'd have to look at that photograph to refresh my memory as far as that direction. Okay. You also realize that at the time that she was found, she had sustained the double above and below knee wounds that broke the numerous bones? Yes. And that distorts the way that the leg lies, does it not? Yes. So the grays could have come after that or before that. Could we look at the photograph so I want to finish these. Finish the other answer. It's on the other side. Well, I want to finish going through these. Then we'll do that. Now, this is 232 and 233, and this is number 10 in the series, and this purports to show the double leg wound that we've been talking about to the left leg, the entry below the knee, the exit above the knee, correct? Yes. Now, this is actually what's known as an entry, exit, re-entry, re-exit wound, correct? Correct. And the place where all the exiting and re entering is going on is behind the knee. The entry is on the front of the knee, and the exit is at the back of the knee. The re entry is on the back of the knee, and the re exit is on the front of the thigh. I hope I didn't confuse the jury. Now, in fact, however, this line is drawn in such a way that it looks like the original entry is sort of to the outside of the knee. Let's look at the photographs if we're going to talk about that degree of precision and wound interpretation. First, I want to ask you, I love it when the witness is like, I want to do this. It's like, no, I'll ask the questions. I'm the attorney. This is my cross. First, I want to ask you what you see on the diagram, then I'll show you the photograph. On the diagram, the way this is drawn, it shows, does it not, the entry either in the middle or to the outside of the knee. I would agree with that, middle or slightly to the outside. Right, and you don't recall right now whether or not these injuries to the knee were actually more towards the inside of the knee? I don't recall. All right, let's look at, I'll show you the photograph. And I recall and I recall Dr. Lawrence when you were testifying on direct and on original cross when you were saying that the knee injury couldn't have happened with her standing or sitting because then you would have expected the pellets to hit her in the stomach. Is that right? To pass on in her body, yes. And standing, the reason it couldn't have been or it couldn't be when she was standing is because the weapon would have to be down somewhere. And based on the autopsy report and the photographs, you didn't see any evidence that there was any entry of pellets or injury to the area of, I guess it would be her left abdomen, where if the leg had been bent while standing or sitting on the couch, the wound would have continued on, or the shot column would have continued. Is that right? Yes. But do you notice in this diagram that the line that is being drawn through this knee ends in the midsection? I can't tell from that perspective. You have to ask the person who created it. It does appear that way from the perspective of this trajectory, doesn't it? It does not appear that way to me. The line ends, but I can't tell where it ends. I can't tell if it ends in the air above her torso or if it ends above the skin. Even if it ends in the area above the torso, the pellets don't evaporate at this point. They continue going somewhere, someplace, don't they? I can't tell from this if they would go past her without striking her, or maybe some of them would hit her left breast, but maybe some of the pellets in her left breast. I thought you said all the pellets came slightly from her left side, and this would be straight on, wouldn't it? The court says, okay, now we have two questions. Ms. Amerson says, wouldn't this indicate that the pellets would come straight on into the left breast? The way it's drawn, but as I said many times, the way it's drawn was that yes, no, oh. The way that's drawn, it indicates that what you just said, we can't use that for precise wound interpretation. Okay, so you can't say that there is any medical evidence that precisely designates this wound occurring in precisely this way. Is that fair? No, this is the wound where the leg we know was above the floor and the knee was bent. We don't know the exact position of the leg beyond that. Okay. You don't know the position of the rest of the body beyond that? No, ma'am. I think I do have a photograph, though, on of the knee. Can I step into the well, Your Honor? Yes, the court says. Ms. Abrams says, thank you. The court says you are also going to give him a photograph of the sofa and the final position of Mr. Menendez, I believe. The witness says, Mrs. And the court says, Mrs. Menendez in front of the sofa. Sorry, that was the court. Ms. Amerson says that's not one of the exhibits we've been using, so I'd ask my co-counsel to locate I think it's 70, I'm not sure. Well, this will do. A scene photograph which shows the position of both decedents. Now, Dr. Lawrence, at the time that Mr. Menendez was being examined at the coroner's office, the bones that showed up on the x-ray in her left leg, both above the knee and below the knee, had been fractured. Yes. Showing you first this photograph, which is numbered Exhibit 200, and in this photograph we are looking, are we not, at the left leg? Yes. And that does give a view of the left side, the outer side of the left knee. Yes. And the outer side of the left knee in the view does not appear to have any damage, correct? You're talking about the knee itself? The knee itself. We'll get into that in a second. I'm not sure what you mean by the outer side. Well, what we're looking at here, this is the kneecap, isn't it? Yes. There doesn't appear to be damage around on the kneecap itself or around the left side of the kneecap. No. But there is some damage towards the back, and that's still in the knee area. That's why I'm confused. So let me just repeat that for all of those Nathan Hockman. I don't think there's too many people that are fans of Nathan Hockman, but for anyone that wants to question Nathan Hockman about the kneecaps. We've already learned in testimony that Jose did not have we've seen the pictures that Jose was not kneecapped. And right here, there doesn't, she asks, Ms. Amerson says, there does not appear to be damage around on the kneecap itself or around the left side of the kneecap. Referring to Mrs. Menendez, he says no. So there you go. There was the Mr. and Mrs. Menendez were not kneecapped, even though that's the story that Nathan Hockman wants to sell to everybody because it makes brothers look more guilty or something. I don't know. All right, Ms. Abramson says, but I'm talking about the front of the knee. I said we'll get to that one in a second. The front of the knee. There is no damage where no damage is seen, and there is no damage where damage is visible. What kind of answer is that? But the jury aren't medical experts. I'm asking you if you are willing to explain what we are seeing, okay? And what we're seeing in this photograph, if you will, is a continuation of the leg farther down from what appears in 186, this photograph, correct? Yes, and the wound. And they line up here and here. The wound in 186 that I'm pointing out here is the same as the wound in the next exhibit, which is 200. 200. These are the same wounds. Okay. Now, what is this thing? This. What is this? I'm not sure. You're pointing to the knee and the patella. Are you asking about the skin or what's the patella? The patella is the kneecap. Okay, and we're looking at the patella, the kneecap of her left leg from a position to the left of it. Yes, correct. And on the side of the kneecap, I'm sorry, on the side of this is the kneecap, correct? Yes. And there's no apparent damage on the side of the kneecap from the photograph, correct? Correct. The kneecap, correct. Now, the area behind the knee is called the popliteal fossa. Pop, popliteal? I'm announcing, or I'm guessing. The popliteal fossa, correct? Right, yes. And that's where the first wound or the first exit wound and then the re-entry wound appears. Yes. And can you see them in this photograph at the bottom of the photograph? Yes. All right. Some of them. Some of them. And the leg is distorted, is it not? It's in an unnatural position here. Yes. Because ordinarily, if a leg is laid out so that you can see the kneecap from the side, you can't usually see behind the knee, correct? Now you're getting to a point where I'm uncomfortable because, okay, the leg clearly is distorted. It shows a fracture distortion, but I'm not comfortable saying whether you would be able to see one area or another if the knee were normal. I don't feel that I can do that. All right. Does it appear that the leg is rotated somehow? I can't tell. You can't tell. All right. Now we'll look at this picture. In this photograph, which is which one? Asks the court. The witness says 83. The lower, they're all interrupting each other. Ms. Abramson says, before you answer a question that I haven't asked you, let me ask you this. Do you know if the photograph was taken before or after the wound was dissected? Probably after. And when you dissect a wound, you make it bigger, correct? Yes. And you can distort its or you can distort its normal, well, not normal, you can distort the appearance that it had when it first arrived at the coroner's office. Yes. So can you tell from that photograph what the wound looked like at the scene or when it was first observed in the coroner's office? That wound looked different on all of those circumstances for reasons even other than dissection. It would have to do with positioning of the leg, cleaning of the area, and so forth. Okay. For example, in this photograph, the leg has been twisted to the right in an unnatural way, as evidenced by the wrinkling of the skin. Right. So the relationships in this picture are not valid. Right. So we can't use that to figure out exactly where on the leg this knee injury was. No, this is the kind of problem that we have in a case like this, and that it is very difficult to precisely reconstruct all of these wounds because the wounds themselves are so large and irregular, and the fractures occur, and it goes on and on. Okay. Oh, I wanted to show you this. This is 201. We were going to look at this, and there may be some others that I can find in a minute of even more close up. In fact, I do have some close-ups and the knee injury on Mrs. Menendez to see if you're correct in determining that the entry and exit are not at a very great angle apart. Let me see what you have that can further assist. He says, this photograph is fairly helpful. She says, is that good? Okay. He says, from the photograph, I would say that the exit was located approximately the center of the exit was about 3 inches below the center of the entry. Okay, so there's a spread of about 3 inches. Yes, the exit is about 3 inches below the entrance. Okay. The court says the witness wanted to see a photograph of the scene showing Mrs. Menendez. Miss Abramson says, yes, I'm asking my. The court says, here's Exhibit 13. Like, what? Are you litigating the case, Judge? Like, she'll get to it when she gets to it. The court says, here's Exhibit 13. The witness says, this is the photograph that I was thinking of, number 13, and it shows Mrs. Menendez in a sort of a fetal position on her right side, with the left leg flexed at the knee, such that the calf is quite close to the thigh, And the areas of wounding are virtually on the top of the leg, the grazing calf wound, and then one of her thigh wounds. Miss Abramson says, well, is it your opinion that the grazing calf wound could have entered the thigh? I don't know. If it did, it would be entering through the lower hole that we've been talking about, correct? That's this one, isn't it? That's what this is, isn't it? Yes. Let me put this up. This is a cropped photograph that shows Mrs. Menendez at the scene lying on her right side, correct? May I complete the answer of the question that we needed the photograph for? Well, let me just describe it for the jury. Then I'll give you an opportunity to complete the answer, okay? That's what this is, a photograph of her lying on her right side. Yes. It's your understanding this is the position she was in when the police got there. Yes. All right. Now, you may say whatever you wanted to say about the calf wound. The reason I wanted to see that photograph was to answer your question about could the gunshot wound, the grazing wound to the calf, have occurred with her in the position she was found rather than on her back. And as you can see, the coffee table would be in the way. I don't. The weapon would have to be parallel to and very close to the floor. It seems unlikely. Well, you realize that what you're looking at here is after, at some point after she's had the double shot to her leg, right to the knee. Yes. And you don't know if that came before or after. I don't know if it's after. So you don't know if it's after or before. Correct. And it came after the left cheek wound? No, the left cheek wound came after this. Yes. So theoretically, she could have been moving the leg. Yes. And it does not necessarily have to be seen, or doesn't necessarily have to have been stationary in the position that you see there. She could have been flopping around, moaning, crawling around, rolling over, and so forth. Let me ask you this, though, about the left calf wound. Do you believe that if the leg was in this position, however, the gun had to be held, or even in a more elevated position, that the left calf grazing wound could have entered the left thigh? For that to happen, she would have had to have been shot in that position, and I don't think she could have been shot in that position. But then again, if you could hold her body, freeze her in that position, and move her somewhere else and tip her legs up or something, I guess it's possible. What? And if she could have tipped her leg up, then that could have happened, correct? I'm not saying it did happen, I'm saying it could have happened. Well, they're both similar. I want to see if it makes sense. It seems very unlikely. Impossible? No, I won't use that word again. Thank you. Okay. Oh, do you notice, by the way, in 232 and 233 that Mr. Menendez's left leg has moved again? I'm not sure. It may have. Now it's more crossed behind the right. It could just be the view. Again, I would prefer to ask the person who did the illustrations. Okay, but dead men don't move their legs. Is that correct? Correct. Now let's go on to 231 and 232, and let me ask you to look at, oh, do you notice, by the way, between 231 and there's a hole in the paper. I think this is 230, is this one. It's 230 and 231. Never mind what I was thinking of asking. I'm not going to ask you that. Now, the way that you have portrayed the shoulder and the head wound on your doll is very similar to what's in this photograph, correct? Yes. Do you see the angle of the trajectory? Yes. Do you make any effort whatsoever to determine angles? On the doll? Yes. Okay. And for every wound? Or no, sorry, he says for every wound. Did you do any measurements or take any measurements or use any measurements as the basis for computing the angles? I used the measurements or angles that were given in Dr. Golden's report, and I also used the appearance of the x-rays and the wound photographs. And I used all of that information to create the best angle I could on the dolls. So you see the foot here that's coming through the coffee table? Yes. And do you understand that in that Mrs. Menendez's foot does appear in that or similar to that position in the scene photographs? Yes. And are you aware that blood was found on the sole of that shoe? No. Are you aware that blood droplets, perfectly round, were found at the top of one of her shoes? We're getting out of my area. Let me ask you if you're aware of it. We don't have to discuss it. No. And finally, we're looking at 228 and 229, correct? Would you read the numbers to me, please? 228 and 229. Thank you. Now, this purports to show the left cheek injury to Mrs. Menendez, correct? Yes. And I believe you testified that you believe that this injury came in horizontally. That's what Dr. Golden's opinion is, and so you don't see any reason to contradict it? I don't argue with it. And straight on, neither left to the right nor up and down? Yes. And do you understand that that's what is being illustrated in this trajectory? I know it's hard, this little green thing. It's pretty close. Probably pretty close. So it's not exactly the same, though, is it? No, and as I've said many times, I don't expect it to be. Okay, but whether you expect the illustration to be or not, the question is, it isn't exactly the same as your opinion and Dr. Golden's opinion. I can't tell. It can be very close. It could be a little off. Do you consider this, based on your experience, Dr. Lawrence, a very complicated set of injuries? Yes. Have you ever been asked to try and determine a sequence of shots as a medical expert? Yes, on many occasions. And do you, let me ask you this. To what extent do you believe your expertise allows you to render an opinion on sequence of shots? As much as anybody else's. What kind of answer is that? You're an expert, buddy. As much as anybody else? Yes. What does that mean? In other words, what I'm trying to convey is that that is the purview or job of the forensic pathologist to make those kinds of assessments if they can be made, and that's what I do for a living. Okay, I didn't mean to distinguish yourself from other forensic pathologists. You mean as well as any other forensic pathologist can. Yes, or anybody else for that matter. So you think laymen can figure this out? No. I meant anybody else who would hold himself out or herself out to be an expert in that area. In the area of what? Of wound ballistics. And so is he a ballistics expert now? And do you believe it is possible? That's what she should have asked him. And are you a ballistics expert? And do you believe it is possible to know the exact sequence of shots based on medical evidence alone? Some occasions it is. What about this occasion? I am certain about the sequence of some of the shots and uncertain about the others. Which one was first? I don't know. Which one was second? We're talking about Jose or either one. I have an opinion about the order of these gunshot wounds, but it's not with certainty. And that's what you do for a living, correct? Yes, this is not one of those cases in which one can, from the medical evidence alone, be certain about the order of sequence. Thank you, Dr. Lawrence. That was pretty good. Any further redirect? Mr. Khan says, no, Your Honor. The court says, okay, thank you, sir. You may step down. Okay, we will have a recess until 10 minutes after the hour. A recess was taken and they come back and there's going to be argument, which we will save for the next episode. So that I think that finishes Dr. Lawrence, it seems, and we will go into some arguments here, and then it's going to be about McCarthy. Uh, what is his name? McCarthy, Roger McCarthy's testimony, who is the person from failure analysis who made all the diagrams that Abramson picked apart with this witness. So she's going to do more damage, I'm sure, to McCarthy's testimony as well. So we will save that for the next episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. Take care and please hit the like button, subscribe, comment, all those things. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Take care. Bye now.